It's better if I read it in the King James, though. The wind bloweth where it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof, but canst not tell whence it cometh and whither it goeth. So is everyone that is born of the Spirit. Jesus is speaking to Nicodemus here. Nicodemus wants to know what it means to be born again. How can I be born a second time, he says. And Jesus' response is neither literal nor direct. Jesus does not say, to be born again, here are the 3 steps you need to follow. Jesus does not even say, to be born again, you need to pray a prayer and ask me into your heart. That is what I was told being born again was. That's not what Jesus says. Nicodemus asks, how can I be born again? And as usual, Jesus is confusing. Even for Nicodemus, who's a teacher of the law, a religious leader. Nicodemus is smart, and he knows God. And when he looks at Jesus, he can see that Jesus has come from God. But he also knows that what Jesus is teaching him will require him to rethink some of the things he has always known. Things about who God is, things about what right religious observance looks like. And maybe Nicodemus is a little skeptical of making those changes. Maybe he's still holding tightly to the way things have always been. How can I be born again? Nicodemus says. And Jesus says, once you're born of water, and once you're born of the Spirit. That word spirit, of course, can be translated breath or wind or spirit. And in this passage, in fact, we translate the same Greek word wind in some places and spirit in other places. And if you're looking for something fun to do when you go home this afternoon, you might reread this passage and read it with only the word wind every time you see wind or spirit, and then read it again with only the word spirit every time you see wind or spirit. I know, I get crazy on Sunday afternoon. Give it a try. So what does it mean to be born a second time? Jesus' answer is, it means to be born of the Spirit, breath, wind. Jesus says, you want to be born again? You know the wind? It blows and you can see its effects, but you can't see it. You don't really understand how it works or where it's going. Well, that's like being born again. You don't understand how it works, but you experience it working. When you're being born again, you feel it, and sometimes it feels like a wind moving through the branches, sometimes it feels like a gentle breeze, and sometimes it's hot and fierce, blowing dust and drought and fire, and sometimes it's a hurricane, and sometimes it's just a breath. New life can feel like all of those things. That's how the Spirit works. Inexplicable, unpredictable. The wind blows where it will. The German Benedictine abbess and mystic Hildegard of Bingen told a story that helps me think about this. She said, listen, there was once a king sitting on his throne. Around him stood great and wonderfully beautiful columns ornamented with ivory, bearing the banners of the king with great honor. Then it pleased the king to raise a small feather from the ground, and he commanded it to fly. The feather flew, not because of anything in itself, but because the air bore it along. Thus am I, said Hildegard, a feather on the breath of God. What if the primary calling of our spiritual lives is simply to learn to be carried by the wind, the Spirit, wind, breath? Not to understand it, not to try to predict successfully where it's going next, not to capture it, not to control it, not to build a structure that will protect us when the winds get too strong, not to construct a set of Icarus wings to help us capitalize on the wind, but just to be carried. How can we be carried like a feather on the breath of God? Well, if you want to be carried, you might have to learn how to fall. I mean, fall hard. Go ahead and mess up. Break some bones. Need a fireman, someone who can pick you up and sling you entirely across his broad shoulders. Fall and wait for help until someone notices you and picks you up. Or fall like a teenager in love. Stop being so self-protective and guarded. Let yourself be overcome by emotion. Feel all the things. Let your need for love be naked and embarrassingly obvious, humiliatingly apparent to everyone you see. Or fall because your work is done. Fall into bed. Fall because you have turned sunlight into food and flamed out from green into red and gold, and so you, like an autumn leaf, get to fall, to be reborn. Or fall like a feather from a migrating bird, molting, shedding what is no longer needed for your journey. You know, this month, March, is actually what our mayor has proclaimed Bird Migration Awareness Month. You've probably noticed them. Millions of birds are migrating through western North Carolina right now, every year. They navigate by the night sky, and they're coming up from two different migratory pathways. Both the Mississippi Flyway and the Atlantic Flyway cross right over Asheville. Look at those birds. Fall like a feather from a bird who follows the stars to find a safe home for the next season. To be a feather on the breath of God, it doesn't really matter where you fall or how. It only matters that you fall. I mean, of course, that you surrender. The Spirit, wind, breath will catch you. Perhaps this invitation to be born again and again is an invitation to fall so that you can be carried. It's an invitation to hold the expectations you have for yourself a little more loosely. And also to loosen the grip you have on those ideas about who God is and what right religious observance looks like, and instead to practice opening to the unexpected and mysterious movement of the Spirit. To surrender to the one who didn't come to condemn the world, but to save the cosmos. If we were looking at the Greek in that line, that's what it says. World is actually cosmos in Greek. Jesus came to save the cosmos. So this week, attend to the movement of the wind, the Spirit breath wind in your life. And let Hildegard's prayer be your prayer as well, your request to be born again. Divine love, move me where you will, for I am a feather on the breath of God. Amen.